so weird to think about.
Well, but Kant says that you can't think without time elapsing. So this has got to be a different question. If we're talking about the speed of light, and at the speed of light time stops, but then you could stop light. So what does that mean with regard to the speed of time at the moment you've done that? But the scientists couldn't have said that they stopped light unless they were experiencing time proceeding with the light not proceeding. So time continued for them. But what would it mean for time to come to a complete stop? I mean, I've seen like science fiction scenes where the person is like, he's just frozen in time and space. So no motion occurs. But is Kant right that you cannot imagine experience without time? If you're frozen in time and space, you wouldn't be experiencing that. Would you? It's not like you imagine yourself sitting there. Is this a dumb question? Like you're never going to be, hopefully, in this situation where you're like frozen. And when you wake up, it's like 500 years into the future or something.
Or really, even just sleeping, you don't really experience time the same way as you experience it when you're awake.
Of course, you're not having any experience then either.
You're not. Well, hopefully not.
So Kant, I think, is trying to say that you can't have experience without a sense of time elapsing. What would this be? What's interesting, though, is he also argues that the space and time are not characteristics of the experience itself. It's a characteristic that your mind imposes on the experience. So the time is passing to me. And by the way, there's a lot of things that we can experience that we experience in time, but we don't think of as experience in space. So, for example, abstract reasoning kinds of things, doing math in your head, equations, you don't think of them as being in space. But to solve them, you feel like you're experiencing time elapsing. Yes?
What does it mean for time to elapse? What does that mean? Like, occur? Is that...
Well, I mean, even if I'm not measuring it, I feel like now is later than when you asked that.
Right.
It's always interesting how much later it feels like.
Yeah.
Because my always experience of slowing time down is when I had the wonderful experience of being tasered. That will be the longest 5 seconds of your life, but you can hear the electrical pulse when you're not, but during it, it's dunk, dunk, dunk. It's really weird, actually, but then to the people observing it, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it's done. For me, you really don't tell it.
I have never had the wonderful I've been gassed.
I don't recommend it.
I've been gassed. The Army, in all its wisdom, thought all of us should be CS gassed. as part of our basic training, so we're not afraid of it.
What do you think the purpose of humans having a changing perspective of time is? Like, because, like you said, it was slow to you, which obviously made it probably more unpleasant, and it was fast to whomever was doing the tasing, probably. So, like, do you think there's, like, any, like, evolutionary reason for that, or, like, why is time like that? Why is it so, like...
There's a interesting movie called Inception.
Yeah,
You've seen it?
parts of it. I fell
Where,
asleep.
I mean, there's a theoretical
Yeah.
hypothesis, you know, going on in the plot. That is that each level of thinking goes seemingly faster as you like go to micro levels of experience, right? So that, you know, the whole movie seems to take a whole lifetime for, like, the Japanese guy that they're trying to rescue. So that by the time they come and find him relaxing on the beach, he's an old guy. But they do rescue him, and in rescuing him, they go back through the multiple levels of consciousness, and when they finally come out at the end, and they're back to real time, he's a young man again. Because he wasn't really getting older physically. His consciousness was just experiencing a different type of time when he was in those micro levels of thinking. I don't know. Have you ever heard of them? You've seen parts of it?
I saw, like, the beginning of it, but I just got confused because I was, like, 10 or something. Whatever.
There's one thing you should know about me. I specialize in a very specific type of security. Subconscious security.
You're talking about dreams. Mr. Carl has a job offer he would like to discuss with you.
What kind of work placement?
Not exactly.
We create the world of the dream. We bring the subject into that dream, and they fill it with their secrets.
Then you break in and steal it.
Well, it's not strictly speaking legal. It's called Inception. I'm ready. I think I found the way home. And this last job, that's how I get there. Dreams feel real while we're in them. It's only when we wake up that we realize something is actually strange.
This is your responsibility. You're not prepared for this.
Dreams collapsing.
I have it under control.
I'd hate to see out of control.
You mustn't be afraid to dream a little bigger, darling.
Trailer was confusing. Yeah.
So it's one of those weird action-packed Matrix-like kind of weird movies. But the physics thesis behind it is that in dreams, time passes at a different speed. In fact, slower. Or faster, depending on. So from the real world, within the dream, you can have a whole lifetime. So within the dreamer, of course, time seems speeded up. And then if you're dreaming within the dream, or even dreaming within the dream, within the dream, within the dream. Did I say that enough times to match the movie? Because there's like sub-dreams in the dream, in the movie. And of course it's in a movie, which is, and with respect to the audience, it's, you know, within an hour and a half or 2 hours at the most, you've seen like a speeded up version of life or whatever, right?
So the movie in and of itself changes time.
Really, really. And yet it seems like we can't experience without experiencing time. The question, of course, of how fast time is going could be an interesting puzzle. But what about space? It seems like you can have experience without experiencing that experience in space, as if it's an abstract concept. So I guess one of the things I'm absolutely puzzled by is what it means that we now have a sports car orbiting Mars. And in a way I feel like I've seen it, but no, I've only seen a video of it. Although the video was made by a camera that was traveling with the car, right? But I can see it over and over again, because I can replay the video. I can play over the whole sequence, the launch sequence, and the rockets separating, and everybody all cheering, and you know, it puzzles me, you know, how all that money was spent to put a rocket up into space and basically launch a sports car.
How do you know how much it cost him?
I'm sure we could figure that out. I imagine they say, don't they?
I don't know. I mean, was the car like a fully functional car, or did they try to strip it to make it lighter?
Well, I know it was his car.
Yeah.
Which was interesting. It was like one of his favorites.
That's so weird.
Yeah. I've read more about this guy. Apparently he's quite strange, actually.
I don't know if you are willing to pay all that money to launch a car into space for nothing but the publicity.
Yeah, it's a giant proof for his company.
Yeah, I think so.
So this is a great question. I'm going to use this next class. I'm going to save that for my this next class. I'm talking about the ontology of art, and that's just perfect. I was thinking about that actually. Is it art? But now when I look at that picture, I'm having the physical experience of seeing the picture. I could feel time elapsing over that. Plus, I'm experiencing space looking at the picture in the sense that I perceive this picture in a specific place on the screen. But I can imagine that in my mind. So having seen the picture, without even pulling up the video, I can picture Starman sitting there behind the wheel of this little red sports car convertible with the dashboard saying, don't panic. Right? And yes, I wonder, you know, they must have emptied the gas. They couldn't have included the batteries. I mean, all the parts that would have burned out, I'm sure that they had to somehow prep the car for
If I
the
were them, I
cold
would've
and heat of
stripped
space.
Stripped out everything heavy so it's lighter to grow the thing.
Yeah, I don't know what they did to it. I bet you could find it. I bet they have somewhere they've explained what they did to the car to make it. But so, having the memory in my mind of this does not require me to also experience that memory in space. So time and space. But I can't think of physical objects unless I think of them or I'm experiencing them in space. But, and this is odd, I forget if it's in our text or it's somewhere else in the critique, but he uses an orange. I never remember to bring an orange when I'm going to talk about this, but you can pick anything you like. Say this, I suppose, right? So if we're looking at the space that this takes up in my hand, right? Now, here goes this kind of thought experiment, right? So keep your mind focused on the space that this is in. And when I take it away, keep your mind focused on that space, not on the cup, right? So think about this space. You can easily do that, right? So Kant uses that little thought experiment to point out that spatial relationships that you're experiencing are not there because of the object, but because of the way your mind experiences the object. We frame it in time and space. So time and space are relative to us, which is why you get this time-space concept. Because you're the observer. You're here, right? So this Einsteinian notion is actually a Kantian point of view. Remember I said that from Kant on, anyone who's a member of the educated elite basically accepts this idea that all of your experience is coming from your point of view. And that's David Hume too, right? Right? The thing that Kant adds to this is that we can know for sure that there has to be an observer. So Hume puts that into question. He says, how do you know there's a persistent self? Theoretically, remember, Berkeley says you never see it, and Hume says, how do you know it's persistent from moment to moment? Could be a different self. What would you mean by it? Kant's coming to the rescue by saying, well, of course, there has to be a persistent observer. How do we know? Well, you couldn't have experience if there wasn't. But time and space is something that the observer imposes on the way they perceive reality. So it's relative to you. Was that artillery, I think? They've been blowing things up for days now. But that's okay, as long as they keep hitting things over there, and not over this way. So that's the first thing that he comes up with. But we could do a thought or a judgment. I would like an image, please. I like a box. Don't you like a box better than just like nothing? Would it be bigger? No.
Try clicking on it again.
Ah, there we go. So, do you remember for Aristotle there were 10 categories? Basic categories? So if you remember, notice there's 12 of these. Unity, plurality, totality. One, many, all. Reality, or affirmation, right? Negation, limitation, inherence, causality, correlation, possibility, necessity, contingency. So we get 12 categories with Kant, whereas if we think of Aristotle's, what? Why so many? That's Kant. Okay, so here they are. Aristotle gives us here's the difference though. This is the Kantian revolution. Actually, Kant referred to it as a Copernican revolution, which I think is really odd, because Copernican revolution seems to imply that we go from thinking that the Earth is the center to the sun is the center. So it's kind of disenfranchising humanity from being the center of the universe, right? But the Kantian revolution, if he's going to call it a Copernican revolution in thought, actually does just the opposite, because it makes us, the observer, as the center of the universe, right? So it seems totally the opposite of a Copernican revolution.
So you're saying that the experiencer is the center of everything?
Yes.
Well, of each individual's own little thing. But I mean, isn't being self-aware about realizing that there are separate people that are the centers of their
Right,
own
but
universe?
you're the one that's perceiving them as separate. You're the one that's perceiving their characteristics. You're the one, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
But we also have the power to put things in perspective and know that we aren't the center of the universe, and we do in fact rotate around the sun, even though it seems it's an illusion that we are the ones.
But that's still in your mind that you are perceiving that.
Yeah.
So that seems like a given. Okay, so I'm conceiving of the world as having lots of other people in it, so I shouldn't be selfish, self-centered, egocentric, all that stuff. And in fact, that's like the liberal progress. If I go to different meta levels of literature, experience, etc. By the way, I haven't gotten it yet, but I'm looking forward to it. And that is Steven Pinker, Enlightenment Now. So it just came out February 13th, or available February 13th. Enlightenment Now. One of his books earlier was The Better Angels of Our Nature, where he argued this is the best human beings have ever had it. And the news media makes it look like we're living in a burning dumpster. He uses the expression of burning dumpster. In like one of the interviews, he talked about this book. We're not living in a burning dumpster, it's kind of weird. But we do have to watch it. We do have to extend our educational process to more people, and we have to keep it going. You can't slacken and not educate, because what happens when you do that is you end up with everything sliding backwards. We could lose progress. we can lose this wonderful opportunity to have the most peaceful world we've ever had. And the news media makes it look, let's face it, the news doesn't sell unless they're giving you horrible thing after horrible thing. If it was all these wonderful things, so-and-so, all the people that had their 90th birthday today, all the people that had their 100th birthday. I know I have a friend who in January celebrated her 100th birthday. She still drives her car. She doesn't wear glasses, although everyone who drives a car behind her need glasses because she's got so many bumper stickers on her car. She's a Bernie Sanders fan, and all that very liberal, feminist kind of stuff. Ruth Sheridan. But when we look at Aristotle's categories, these are categories of objects. The very first category that they need is they have to be substantial. They have to have matter in them. Then we break them up into how many. Everything is how many. It is. But it's the thing that has that number. Now when we look at Kant's, everything has all the numbers. What do I mean? We see everything as being one, but we also see it as having parts. Aristotle thought everything had its own intrinsic number. So like one urn, a vase, or whatever, right? But for us, psychologically, we, through this kind of, that's why I drew it like a pane of windows, or like a window full of panes, or like 12 different ones, right? So it's like we're seeing things metaphorically through this window of human perception. And everything we experience as being one classroom, but lots of individuals, lots of desks, lots of chairs, lots of cells, one hand. So for the Greeks, for Aristotle, it was very confusing. How could something be both one and many at the same time? No, it can't be, right? Because they were thinking the characteristics the thing actually had. But now this Kantian revolution basically tells us, okay, our way of humanly perceiving the world automatically breaks it up using these categories of thought. And by the way, this is where our culture kind of takes another branch. Because for Kant and for Kantians, these categories are like the basic, so if you're going to be a sane person, you have to be okay with perceiving things as having causality, having inherence, right? Otherwise, you're not psychologically well structured. You're confused, mentally ill, perhaps, crazy, maybe. You need, in order to be rational, you have to have this structure that you share with other human beings. But right away, at least within that generation, so Kant, Schelling, Hegel, might throw in Fichte and others, they immediately kind of trounce on this and say, it's not just these particular categories, but it's something else that structures how we perceive the world, and that's culture, language. So all along, I keep emphasizing today, we think of things within this new frontier of trying to understand how language structures our mind. Do you see, though, that question, though, is, so Kant gives us the idea that the way we perceive phenomena comes from some sort of structure, and we can transcend the limit of thinking that all of our experience is phenomena and that there's no structure in it, because the structure comes from the way our minds perceive it. But we've gone beyond this particular Kantian set of ideas as structuring our experience.
Can you say that again, but like in dumber words maybe? Like that whole spiel, like what Kant did?
Well, so Kant uses the same classical categories, although he changes them a little bit. You know, we can look, is substance on here? I don't see substance on here, right, strictly speaking. Maybe here, but that, we could see that in Aristotle's list. I'm looking at this particular set here, right? And notice time is not actually part of the categories, according to Kant. That's why I covered time and space first. Everything has to happen in time. Everything, obviously, that has spatial requirements has to be in space. But remember, we're imposing that space. But so the idea, though, that there are categories, that everything fits within. For Aristotle, it was these were categories of the things. For Kant, it's the categories of the mind. So we perceive things a certain way by the very nature of us being human beings. By the way, not all human beings perceive things the same way. I mean, there are blind people, there are deaf-mute people, there are
So you're saying
colorblind people.
phenomena is also fluid to different things other than just existing and experiencing them, because like the thing in itself might mean something different to different people.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So they're therefore, even though they may look or smell the same, they're interpreted in a different way and can be something completely different.
Some people hate garlic, other people love garlic.
Is that,
But garlic still exists.
did Kant expand upon that in that way, that there's other factors that come into play when experiencing things?
That was an interesting problem with Kant, is that he didn't go, you know, he went this far, and that was an incredible flip. I mean, it was a revolution, because now instead of thinking things are the way they are and not another way, we realize, whoa, things are the way they are to us because I perceive them a certain way. But they could be different to you and to you and to you, right? That's second nature to us in America today, to grow up thinking that each of us perceives things a different way. We get that, you know, just embedded in our heads in school right from the get-go. You know, if you go to a school where, you know, the teachers, that's like one of their main things, is getting young kids to realize that other people have feelings too, and those feelings might be different than yours, right? You have to respect their feelings, etc. I mean, that's all Kantian. Yeah.
So I missed the lecture on Hume, but I'm confused about why that's any different from what he was saying, that we don't see the thing in itself, we see what we're seeing. And so then that's the reason that we can't know anything for sure. So how is Kant, I guess I'm a little bit confused about how Kant's
Yeah, so
responding
what
to
is
that.
Kant adding to it?
Yeah.
Well, Hume was primarily arguing in that whole treatise against the philosophers who thought that they had understood how perception and the world is structured. Mostly against the rationalists, the ones in continental Europe. 'Cause in a way, he does criticize Berkeley, who, right, so the way I'm presenting this is like there's a historical progress, right? So Berkeley expands on problems he finds in Locke, then Hume expands on problems he finds in Berkeley, and then Kant is amazed with what he finds in Hume, but what does he add to it? Excellent question. Because yes, he accepts what Hume says. In the sense he says, Hume didn't go far enough. The questions Hume asks, he says that in our text, the questions he asks could be applied not just to like causality, but all these other relations as well, right? You know, so in a sense, yes, Hume, you're right, but it's also this. And then the problem that Hume sets is, can we have metaphysics? Can we have a science that explains how we can have experience? And Hume doesn't think so.
Right.
But now Kant turns around and says, yes, we can.
So he adds a scientific sort of look at it to try to, I guess, prove Hume's theory or like expand upon it. So would you say that like that Kant answers Hume's pretty well because he's gathering more information on it?
Yes. He's expanding on Hume by pointing out there's more things that Hume didn't talk about that are subject to the same kind of analysis that Hume gave causality. But that's kind of a really neat place in this. Let's see if I can find it. Let's see anyone with the actual text. But that's not going to help. I'm in totally the wrong place. I'm looking for 7 plus 5 equals 12. Here's your table of judgments and stuff. So like this stuff here. He expands on it and adds, and it's always 12 as far as I know. So the concept of the understanding, it's in the middle of the page, and the table of judgments is above. And then the science of nature, he's only got 4 sections. However, but so Hume argues that there are relations of the mind that we can know. So we know those things. So like for Hume, 7 plus 5 equals 12, you know without experience. Kant argues, no, you don't. And it's kind of interesting because the reason you know 7 plus 5 equals 12 isn't because you can like just sit in your armchair and note, here it is. So it must at first be thought. It's page 786 if you look it up. It must at first be thought that the proposition 7 plus 5 equals 12 is a mere analytical judgment. Remember I had analytic, synthetic, a priori, and a posteriori. So those are the 4. This is like the section where that comes up. So 7 plus 5 equals 12 is a mere analytic judgment. Knowing what you do about math, boom, 7 plus 5 equals 12. 7 plus 6 equals 13. 7 equals 14. Oddly easier to remember because you're just 2 times 7. Right? But following the concept of the sum of 7 and 5 according to the law of contradiction. But on closer examination, it appears that the concept of the sum of 7 plus 5 contains merely their union in a single number, without its being at all thought what the particular number is that unites them. So how do you know it's 12? The concept of 12 is by no means thought by merely thinking of the combination of 7 and 5, and analyze this possible sum as we may, we shall not discover 12 in the concept. We must go beyond these concepts by calling to our aid some intuition which corresponds to one of the concepts. That is either our 5 fingers or 5 points. And he refers to a particular book on arithmetic that was contemporary at the time. And we must add successively the units of the 5 given in the intuition to the concept of 7. Hence, our concept is really amplified by the proposition 7 plus 5 equals 12, and we add to the first concept a second concept, not thought in it. Basically, what I'm interpreting this to be about is that you have to learn math in school in an actual experience. So it's not like mathematics is sitting there for all the world to know automatically. Instead, we learn it by having a physical experience in class where, like, you learn manipulatives and things, right? You know, blocks. This equals 12. See, now I have 12, right? So we learn, so while Hume seems to imply that there are relations of ideas, which are things that we can know because they're abstract and not dependent on. So I know unicorns because I know that a unicorn has a horn. I usually think of a unicorn as white, etc., right? Well, but Hume is actually wrong in thinking that, because we have had actual experiences. I mean, he talks about that. We have to have experiences of the parts that we then put together to create new things. But that's true of abstract ideas too. So Kant again pushes further than Hume does. But then he still has to draw us back and say, yes, but you can actually still do metaphysics, because we can then theorize what must be the case in order for phenomena to happen.
Is phenomena what we can't see, the thing in itself, or is phenomena?
Phenomena is all you experience. So,
Okay.
The way they've been talking about it, this is gradually building up. Hume talks about them as perceptions. Berkeley talks about it as esse is percipi, are perceptions, right? To be is to be perceived. Unless I'm perceiving it, it doesn't exist. So if I'm not looking at you, I don't see you. Do I know you're there? Well, I presume you are, but that's a guess. I'm not. I'm only sure if I'm actually looking at you. Right? So the hypothesis of the British empiricists is that knowledge comes only from physical experience. But Hume especially does away with the idea that our memory is something we can count on. And once you do away with that, how do I know you're still there? Now I see you, but now I don't, right? Well, I remember you sitting there. I was right. But what if I turned out to be wrong? Because I have been wrong. I'm wrong more often the older I get, right? It's lovely when my wife and I argue over things, and it's absolutely clear to me when something happened and how it happened. She says, no, that's not what happened. And I begin to notice that I have doubts, because maybe I can recall that, she's talking about something that's, yes, I remember that. So her memory of a lot of our experiences is very different than my memory of those same experiences. But Kant argues that if you're a rational person, and yeah, you're going to meet a lot of people that are not rational. Nicholas Cruz is our newest horror story, where all these people are talking about, I knew he was a problem. I didn't like him in my classroom. I was scared to death being alone with him, etc. Right? The schools would check his backpacks to make sure he wasn't bringing any weapons in. Eventually, they got to the point where they said no backpack at all. Right? He's not allowed to bring stuff.
Really? It was to that extent that they were already taking his backpack away?
Yeah, they didn't trust him, and for good reason, apparently. A lot of people had bad feelings about it. But the thing is, that doesn't come out now. Now it comes out. And, at the teacher meeting that I was reading about, they're all saying, how many of you have a Nicholas Cruz in your school? Everyone did. Not the same guy, but all of them feel like there's some individuals that they have in their student body that are just like Nicholas Cruz. What do? Not let them in?
And you can't go off of just vague suspicion just because they seem shady, because that's they would call that just.
At what point, though, do you feel like it's like the one teacher said? If you don't let him in, or actually the situation he said is, so Nicholas Cruz is coming in behind another student. So do I open the door to save that student, but then I let Nicholas in? And get 17 people killed plus 14 people injured or whatever, right? If on the other hand I lock the door and not let that person in, then that person is in danger, right? It's kind of the same. That really happened, of course, in the Navy. Where they were the ship was rammed by the oil tanker or whatever, and the water's pouring into the berth. It's full of men, and the men are trying to get out. But if you don't close the door, the ship will sink. If you close the door, all the men that are still trapped in there are trapped in there and are going to drown. And they close the door. So they trapped and drowned a lot of their men. But that way the ship was able to stay afloat. What do you do in that situation? Right?
Isn't that the question that's I forget how it goes exactly, but there's a train going down the thing. That thing? Yeah.
You push the fat guy.
Yeah, you can either push the fat guy
What a
or
stupid
kill,
example.
I
That's
know.
not how I've heard. That's not how I've heard the question before. But that's not.
Or
do you
no,
it's
it's
throw
pull
the-
Yeah.
it's
pull
pull
the
the lever,
lever.
and it's either gonna kill a person you care about or 5 people you don't know. Or something
Well,
like
yeah,
There's
that
a few, I think.
they do ask about the fat guy though. That's
That makes no sense, at all. You're not gonna stop a train because of some one fat guy.
Yeah, I never heard the fat person concept.
one of the other ones is where there's a fat guy. And the idea is you are harming the one person instead of the 5 or 6 or whatever.
But it's more personal harming him because you have to push him.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But what I brought this up for was because Kant is talking about how we can tell you're a rational person. Nicholas Cruz, because of what he did, not rational. Everyone agrees. No one thinks that there was a rational reason why he went ahead and did all this stuff. I mean, a scientist, a social scientist, wants to say, okay, there were, you know, he was mentally ill, plus the gun was available, plus he was imitating, I would imagine, previous shooters, you know, wants to do the same thing. So maybe outdo them by having even more casualties, right?
Which starts a whole chain because of how famous he got.
We've already
now.
had people that have been arrested because they wanted to outdo him. One
Because they
was
saw
in
how
Vermont
popular.
or Maine or somewhere.
Yeah, I read an article about a girl who was planning to shoot up a school, like, to get the attention that he did, but she was stopped. Like, her dad found, like, some letters she was writing and, like, locked her up and stuff.
She was
so.
like really young too, wasn't it? If I remember.
Yeah, she was like a middle schooler or
Yeah, it was
something.
like, she was like 12 or 13.
Yeah, she had it all planned out, like, what she was
Yeah.
gonna do.
They found like bomb making materials and stuff.
Wasn't there a grandma who stopped someone like that? He had the whole plan in his journal and stuff, and the grandma found it and turned it in.
Oh, well, yeah, how many of these same sort of things are happening, you know? And, you know, I think people are right that say this is going to happen again. Because we can't really figure out who is going to do this kind of thing. So Kant's categories they open up the possibility that a psychologist can study a person and try to figure out, are they rational or not? How do they do this? And in fact, I remember when I was asking to go into seminary, one of the tests that they gave me was the Rorschach test. I had to go to a doctor, psychiatrist, at Hahnemann Hospital in Philadelphia. Crappy little room. I had to sit at the table with this guy, and he showed me the Rorschach ink blots.
Oh.
Remember those?
Oh, those are kind of like dumb to me, like
details.
as far as actually like determining personality.
Or everything you just see slips.
So yeah, he sits there and he straight-faced. Now, today you could take the test online. You don't have to sit. I mean, his job really was to just write down what I said. But my job in this test was to tell him what I saw. And you can't say it's a bilateral symmetrical ink blot. Now, you're supposed to see something in it.
You could see multiple things and choose what you
A
want
frog
to see.
taking a shit or something.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know.
A dancing
But-
person, two dancing people.
I see two sloths like about to kiss.
I think it's always
The one on the top left, or oh yeah,
The one on the top
It
left.
looks like two people dancing.
the one like in the middle on the top looks like people high fiving each other.
Yeah, it looks like two like sloths. Like,
Or like two
with bloody
bears.
feet.
Or like one ran along.
I don't get the ink blotter test because you could see like 10 different things and be like, okay, what job or whatever am I going for? I'm
well,
just gonna pretend I see
that's the
something.
job of the psychiatrist to determine whether what you're seeing is within the norm or not.
Well, what
You know,
if
if
it's not though? You're just like more creative, right?
Well, somehow they judge what you see and decide that you're not normal. And that, of course, is kind of interesting. You know, how do they get to be the judge? You know, and yet the basis here is essentially Kant. That in a way, if you're a rational person, you're perceiving phenomena, and this is an example of odd phenomena, but you're perceiving it through your filter of categories normally, right? So the Gestalt psychologist, Gestalt means image, basically, form, shape. The Gestalt psychologist is basically studying how you perceive images, and based on that, deciding whether or not your categories of perception are rational or not. So that's a very Kantian kind of point of view. In fact, I would say that psychology as a field really kind of is based on a Kantian attitude, that you're not being possessed by demons, and that's why you're thinking evil thoughts. And instead, your mind has been improperly programmed so that you're not perceiving phenomena normally. Right? So if you're mentally ill, it's something wrong with the way you perceive structure, perceive reality. Right? So it's an internal fault on your part. That could have been caused by, say, parents not raising you properly, always poking you with needles or something, I've adopted children, some of whom needed lots of surgery. And guess what? When you go to the hospital, they poke you with all sorts of things. They give you IVs, they take your blood, they do all kinds of tests, which are not fun, especially when you're an infant. So you eventually get to the point where going to the hospital is not what you want to do, right? Whereas, maybe normally you would think going to the hospital would give you a sense of, yay, I'm going to feel better afterwards. Maybe not, right? But so, yeah, your experiences can certainly program you to perceive things a certain way. Carl Jung was kind of intriguing this way, because Carl Jung expands that to culture. And that, in a way, feels more like Hegel. But Freud is definitely influenced by Hegel, although officially Freud says, I never read Hegel, I'm not influenced by him, but Hegel had such an impact on German culture and French culture that Kant, or rather Freud, could not have avoided the impact of it. And Hegel is basically, I think, laying the grounds for sociology. So while Kant seems to give us the grounds for psychology, where the psychologist is trying to figure out what's wrong with you, or is there nothing wrong with you, right? Sociologist is trying to say, what's wrong with us, or is there nothing wrong with us? Actually, I'm sure a sociologist will always find something wrong with us. In fact, I think a psychologist will always find something wrong with you. If you go to him, that must mean that you've got something wrong with you. Yes?
So I'm just still confused about how Hume said, we can't do metaphysics, but then how Kant responded to that and said that we can.
Well, I think Hume is right in saying that conceiving of a theory that explains how we can have experience is not something that we can experience. I mean, it's beyond the actual experience we can have. But Kant, remember, was a rationalist. Didn't believe that all of our knowledge came from experience. So he's merging Hume's empiricism with rationalism. So this is the point where continental European Platonic Descartes, Spinoza, Leibniz, Kant, kind of unites with Hume, Berkeley, Locke, Hobbes, Bacon. So the two things, in a sense, unite with Kant, where, yes, we get phenomena, and that's where all the things impinge on our eyes, etc. And remember, we'll explore even our abstract concepts come from that phenomena because we have these experiences as children that teach us abstract concepts. But at the same time, there's logic in the way all these abstract concepts work, which is true even outside of the phenomena we experience. I mean, we might learn about it through phenomena, but it must be the case that things cannot contradict. I mean, if there's a 2-ton gold-plated ball sitting on top of the dome in Florence, then it must not be the case that there isn't a 2-ton gold-plated ball sitting on top of the dome in Florence. And let me check. Can I trust? I don't know how to spell his name. Brunelleschi's dome. But there it is. Can you see it? That gold ball up there weighs 2 tons.
Is it solid gold or just gold weighted?
It's a stone ball that is covered in 8 copper plates that were welded together and then gold plated. And the way the copper plates were welded together, they didn't have welding torches. They used mirrors that collected sunlight and were aimed at
Oh my god.
the edges.
That's so tedious.
That's insane.
Why didn't they just
That
use
was-
like fire or something?
I just read that last night. Da Vinci, Leonardo, was a young man in training for Boccaccio or whatever the guy was. And one of the very first things that the shop was doing at the time was building that gold ball. And Da Vinci, of course, was absolutely impressed at, yeah, sounds like it would be tedious, but he went on to build even larger mirrors that could do other work like that in Rome.
Very smart.
So
They
did
were amazing.
assemble it up there, or did they get it up there somehow? 'Cause if it's a 2-ton
They used devices.
it's quite a lot of
By
devices.
the way, the devices, they didn't have some guy 2 tons.
But even today,
That's
2
still, I
tons.
believe, the largest dome in Europe. I think. I've been in there with my Oculus Rift. It's kind of impressive. You know, and when you see these things, they actually have like, you see, this is a fence. You can go up here. This is like a place where you could like walk around. Probably benches, or you could sit and look around and see. And In fact, it looks like there's one up here too.
So has anybody tried to steal the gold off of the ball? I'm just thinking there's a giant gold thing on top of the church. People like to steal things like that.
Probably pretty noticeable though.
And, yeah.
True.
And it's 2 tons.
Well, not
Well, you
necessarily
just
the whole
steal the
thing,
gold off
like,
of it.
just scrape the gold plating off.
Oh.
You know, that probably wouldn't be very cost effective.
Yeah, there's probably easier things to.
Probably a lot easier to go across the street and, you know, hit that gold shop over there.
Is it gold?
I believe so.
There used to be at least.
I'm not suggesting that, just so that the camera records that I'm not actually suggesting you
Or
should go across there.
Across the hall, the $10,000 projector.
Oh,
My
yeah.
professors keep mentioning how expensive it is and then saying, don't steal it.
Well,
That sounds like entrapment.
your life is worth much more than that,
That's true.
and you'd be
Yeah,
putting
please
your
don't
life
run
at
into
risk
that.
trying to get there.
Why would you, I don't know, why would you steal a projector?
Because it's $10,000.
I know, but it's also secondhand. How are you gonna cut out the wires?
What would be even better is trying to
Who would you
build
even
your own
sell that
rocket,
to? Like
so you
another
could go
teacher
out
that
into
has to
space.
buy it, like from some weird
Crawford
person.
probably would.
Living out the childhood dream.
Freud comes up with, speaking of dreams, Freud comes up with a theory which is quite impressive. I mean, Freud was important. Today we look back on Freud and say, that's pretty weird,
Yeah.
right? You know, the 3 stages, you know, the oral stage, the anal stage, the genital stage, whatever.
Wait, what? Stage? What is stage like of events?
Maturation. So, I don't want PPP. I don't know why they've got 3 here. So what he suggests, it's 20 after, right? So, is that clock right?
Yeah, pretty much.
It's a minute off.
Yeah, I have 12:19 or 2:19. So for Freud, you have the ego is what you're developing, but on this side you have the id, which is just the self in Greek. So like if you're focused on the id, you're an id-ia.
Oh.
But then over here you have the super ego, which is society, peers, etc. So this acts on the id. The id is your basic urges, you're hungry, etc. That society has to tell you what to do with those. So it structures your ego. And if it does a good job in structuring your ego, then you're normal, and you will cope with at least the skills that your society provides. If, on the other hand, your father does weird things to you, or they don't give you what you need, or they don't let your id satisfy its basic urges by some way, society doesn't teach you how to deal with your angst or whatever, then you end up with subconscious problems that go out and cause you to behave in ways that are not normal. So if you think of it this way, this is a Kantian approach, that the way you behave, whether you're normal or not, is a result of how your mind has been structured by your experience. interaction. So that's a Kantian effect. It's a theory to explain why people behave the way they do, based on a Kantian interpretation. So that's where that really gets started. So is Elon Musk's car out in space art?
Oh no. Okay.
Oh, no. Help me remember these crazy quiz questions. What I've discovered is I give you these brilliant quiz questions and I get home and I can't remember what they are, so I can't post them on my...
I did notice you didn't post it on your blog this last one.
Oh, the last one was,
How did Rousseau, what do you think of Rousseau's?
yeah, his theory of education.
Yeah, I texted it to Linnea, and so that, I had one. Have a good week.
You too. See you Thursday. Thursday is the day.